Hi, I'm Marcus. While I was serving overseas in the military, my sister Rachel drained our grandmother's $780,000 inheritance from both our names, forged documents to make it appear I'd signed everything over, and convinced our entire family I'd abandoned my responsibilities. For 2 years, I stayed silent, watching from afar as she built a life on stolen money. But when that judge called my name in court, everything changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The humidity in Jacksonville was suffocating when I stepped off the plane. 2 years of silence had taught me patience, but coming home felt like walking into a museum of my former life. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The airport, the palm trees lining the highway, even the billboard for Rodriguez Family Insurance that had been there since I was 12. My sister Rachel's face smiled back at me from a real estate ad on the terminal wall. "Your trusted local agent," it read. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back. Not my parents, not Rachel, not even my buddy Diego, who'd been updating me through carefully worded emails about the family drama I'd supposedly created by walking away from my responsibilities. According to everyone back home, I'd signed away my inheritance and cut all contact. According to Rachel's carefully constructed narrative, I was the selfish brother who chose the military over family obligations. But I had something Rachel didn't and know about: a folder of documents stored in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Documents I'd secured before my deployment, including a power of attorney that explicitly stated no financial decisions could be made without my physical presence and notarized consent. Documents that proved everything she'd told the family was a lie. The Uber driver was chattier than I wanted him to be. "Military?" he asked, glancing at my duffel bag. "Yes, sir," I replied, staring out the window as we passed the sprawling strip malls and subdivisions that had sprouted up while I was gone. "Thank you for your service," he said automatically. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the last real conversation I'd had with Rachel, 3 weeks before my deployment. We'd been sitting on Grandma Elena's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky over Biscayne Bay. Grandma had passed just 2 months earlier, leaving us her house, her investments, and a meticulously organized estate split equally between Rachel and me. "Promise me you'll look out for each other," she'd made us swear on her deathbed. "Family is all you have in the end." Rachel had seemed genuinely emotional that night on the porch. "I'm going to miss you so much, Marcus," she'd said, gripping my hand. "But I promise I'll take care of everything here. Grandma's house, the estate, all of it. When you come back, everything will be exactly how she left it." I'd believed her. We'd grown up 3 years apart but close as twins, united by Grandma Elena's wisdom and our parents' volatile marriage. Rachel was my protector when kids at school made fun of my stutter. I was her confidant when she struggled with anxiety in high school. The Uber pulled up to a modest apartment complex in Kendall. I'd booked a monthly rental online, choosing a place far enough from our family's neighborhood in Coral Gables to avoid unexpected encounters. The plan was simple: observe, document, and when the moment was right, reveal the truth. 2 years of radio silence hadn't just been about avoiding confrontation, it had been about gathering evidence. My first stop was the Public Records Office. If Rachel had truly inherited everything legally, there would be a paper trail. If she'd forged my signature, that trail would have inconsistencies. I'd learned enough about military intelligence to know how to track patterns, how to spot discrepancies that others might miss. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an office that smelled like old coffee and copier toner. "I need to review property transfer records for Elena Vasquez, deceased about 2 years ago," I told her. She typed the name into her system, squinting at the screen through reading glasses that hung on a beaded chain. "Here we go," she said, printing out several pages. "Looks like the estate was transferred to Rachel Vasquez Chen, Sole beneficiary, about 18 months ago. She handed me the papers, and my stomach tightened as I saw my own signature at the bottom of a document I'd never seen before, much less signed. But something was off. The signature looked like mine at first glance, but I'd developed a habit during my deployment of signing my name with a small star after the S in Marcus, a tribute to the rank insignia I'd earned. This signature had no star. More importantly, it was dated 3 weeks after I'd already shipped out to Kuwait. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "is there any indication of when these documents were notarized?" She pointed to a stamp in the corner. "Right here, notarized by Carmen Torres on August 15th. That's downtown Miami Federal Building." I thanked her and stepped outside into the blazing afternoon sun. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Heard you were back in town. Coffee? D." It was Diego. Somehow word had already gotten out about my return. We met at a Cuban cafe near the University of Miami campus, a place where we'd spent countless hours during high school talking about our futures. Diego looked older, more serious. The easy smile I remembered shadowed by something I couldn't identify. He'd always been Rachel's friend first, but over the years, the three of us had become inseparable. "Man, it's good to see you," he said, standing to hug me. But there was tension in his shoulders, awkwardness in the gesture. We ordered cortaditos and sat across from each other at a small table near the window. "So," he said after a long pause, "I guess you know about everything?" "Depends what you mean by everything," I replied, stirring my coffee slowly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Diego looked uncomfortable. "Rachel said you signed over your inheritance. Said you wanted nothing to do with Grandma's estate because you were building a new life in the military. But Marcus, man, some things didn't add up. Rachel bought that house in Pinecrest, the one with the pool. That's like 800 grand easy. Plus she started that real estate business, got the fancy car." He trailed off, studying my face. "Did you see me sign anything?" I asked quietly. "No, but she showed us the documents. Your signature was right there. And when we tried to contact you to confirm..." He shrugged helplessly. Radio silence. I realized then that my decision to cut off communication hadn't just been about avoiding confrontation. It had inadvertently provided cover for Rachel's lies. My silence had been interpreted as confirmation of my abandonment. "Diego," I said, leaning forward, "I never signed anything. I've been silent for 2 years because I've been building a case." His eyes widened. "What kind of case?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I recognized immediately. Rachel. The text read, "Heard you're back. We need to talk. Family dinner Sunday. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I showed Diego the message. He whistled low. "She knows." "Good," I said. "I want her to know." That night, I sat in my sparse apartment with case files spread across the kitchen table like a tactical operation. I'd been busy during my 2 years overseas, using my military connections to request documentation, hiring a private investigator in Miami to track financial records, and most importantly, discovering that the notary who'd supposedly witnessed my signature, Carmen Torres, had been out of the country on vacation the week my documents were allegedly signed. My phone rang. Mom. I'd been dreading this call. "Marcus? Mijo? Is it really you?" Her voice was thick with emotion and something else. Guilt? "It's me, Mom. Why didn't you tell us you were coming home? Rachel said you wanted nothing to do with us, but I never believed. I hoped." She was crying now. "Mom, listen to me carefully. I never signed away my inheritance. I never cut contact because I didn't want the family. I cut contact because I needed time to prove What Rachel did. Silence stretched over the line. Then, in a voice so small I could barely hear it, "Oh, Marcus, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Sunday dinner is going to be very interesting." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation. I met with an attorney recommended by the JAG office, a sharp woman named Patricia Morales, who specialized in inheritance fraud. She reviewed my documents with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen this type of betrayal before. "You have a strong case," she told me, adjusting her glasses as she studied the forged signature. "The notary's travel records alone are enough to prove fraud. Add the signature analysis and the power of attorney you secured before deployment, and you're looking at a clear case of inheritance theft." "What happens next?" I asked. "We file a civil suit for recovery of assets, but given the amount involved and the documentary fraud, the state attorney's office will likely pursue criminal charges as well." She leaned back in her chair. "Your sister could be looking at serious jail time." That should have felt satisfying, but it didn't. Instead, I felt hollow, like I was watching my childhood die in real time. Sunday arrived gray and humid, typical Miami weather that matched my mood perfectly. I drove through the familiar neighborhoods of my youth, past the house where we'd grown up, past Grandma Elena's old place that now had Rachel's car in the driveway, a gleaming white BMW that cost more than most people make in a year. My parents still lived in the same house in Coral Gables, a modest two-story with a front yard full of fruit trees and a fence that Dad had never quite finished painting. Rachel's car was already there when I arrived, along with another vehicle I didn't recognize. I sat in my rental car for a moment, staring at the house where we'd spent countless Sunday dinners as kids, where Grandma Elena had taught us to make her famous black beans, where Rachel and I had done homework together at the kitchen table. The betrayal felt like a physical weight in my chest. The front door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there, tears already flowing, and pulled me into a hug that lasted too long and not long enough. She looked older, frailer, like the stress of the family division had aged her years in months. "My boy," she whispered against my shoulder. "My beautiful boy." Dad appeared behind her, his expression unreadable. We'd never been close. He was a man of few words who believed emotions were weaknesses. But he nodded at me with something that might have been respect. "Son," he said simply. "Dad." Rachel was waiting in the living room, and the sight of her stopped me cold. She looked successful, polished, designer clothes, and perfectly styled hair. But her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there 2 years ago, a calculation that made my stomach turn. "Hello, Marcus," she said, not getting up from the couch. "Rachel." The stranger sitting next to her stood and extended his hand. "Marcus, I'm David Chen, Rachel's husband. I've heard so much about you." So she'd gotten married, with my money, I realized, though I kept that thought to myself. Dinner was a masterpiece of awkward tension. Mom had made all my favorite foods: ropa, vieja, maduros, yuca with garlic. But everything tasted like cardboard. Rachel dominated the conversation, talking about her real estate business, their new house, their upcoming vacation to Europe. She painted a picture of success and happiness that didn't quite ring true. "Marcus has been so quiet," she said at one point, looking directly at me. Still the strong, silent type. "I've learned that sometimes it's better to observe before speaking," I replied. David, who seemed genuinely nice and completely unaware of the undercurrents, tried to fill the silences. "Rachel tells me your career military. That must be challenging being away from family for so long." "Some challenges are worth it," I said. "Others reveal who people really are." Rachel's fork paused halfway to her mouth. After dinner, while Mom showed David photo albums in the living room and Dad retreated to his workshop as he always did when emotions ran high, Rachel and I found ourselves alone on the back patio where we'd had that conversation 2 years earlier. "So," she said, lighting a cigarette she didn't use to smoke. "Are we going to do this?" "Do what?" "Don't play games, Marcus. You came back for a reason." I looked at her for a long moment. This person who'd shared a womb before we were born, who'd known me longer than anyone alive, who'd promised our dying grandmother she'd take care of everything. "I came back because Grandma Elena raised us better than this," I said finally. Rachel laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Grandma Elena's dead, Marcus. You left. I stayed. I took care of Mom and Dad while you were playing soldier halfway around the world. You deserve nothing that isn't yours," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "You forged my signature, Rachel. You lied to our family. You stole from me." She stood up slowly, crushing her cigarette under her heel. "Prove it." I pulled out my phone and showed her a text from Patricia Morales. "Civil suit filed. Criminal referral submitted. Court date set for next month." The color drained from Rachel's face. "You want to know why I stayed silent for 2 years?" I asked, standing to face her. "Because I wanted to be absolutely certain. Because I loved you enough to hope I was wrong. Because I needed to grieve the sister I thought I knew." Her hands were shaking now. "Marcus, please, we can work this out. David doesn't know anything. Mom and Dad, they can't handle this stress. Just, how much do you want? We can split it differently. I'll give you half of whatever's left." "It's not about the money anymore, Rachel. It never was just about the money." "Then what?" she asked, tears streaming down her face for the first time since I'd arrived. "It's about truth. It's about the promise we made to Grandma Elena. It's about teaching your husband that he married a thief, teaching our parents that their golden child is a criminal, and teaching you that actions have consequences." I turned to walk back into the house, then paused at the door. "See you in court, sister." The month that followed was a whirlwind of legal preparations, depositions, and family devastation. David filed for separation after learning the truth. Mom alternated between crying and asking how her children had come to this. Dad didn't speak to either of us, disappearing into his workshop for hours at a time. Rachel hired an expensive attorney and initially tried to fight the charges, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that she'd had verbal permission, that the documents were legitimate. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her lawyer eventually advised her to consider a plea deal. The day of the hearing arrived with the kind of Miami sunshine that seemed inappropriate for the gravity of the situation. The courthouse was an imposing building downtown, all glass and marble, designed to intimidate. I wore my dress uniform, not out of theatrics, but because it felt like armor. Patricia Morales met me at the courthouse steps. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I looked up at the building where my sister would face the consequences of her choices. "I've been ready for 2 years." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, filled mostly with lawyers and court personnel. Rachel sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom and Dad sat in the gallery, Dad's arm around Mom's shoulders as she cried silently into a tissue. I hadn't wanted them to come, but they'd insisted. "She's still our daughter," Mom had said. "You're both still our children." The judge was an older black woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen it all. Judge Patricia Williams, according to the nameplate on her bench. She reviewed the case file with the thorough attention of someone who understood that families were being destroyed in her courtroom. Rachel's attorney spoke first, painting a picture of miscommunication and family misunderstanding. He described my sister as a devoted daughter who'd made mistakes while trying to care for elderly parents and manage a complex estate. He asked for leniency, citing her clean record and community involvement. Then it was Patricia's turn. She laid out the evidence methodically: the forged signature, the notary fraud, the financial transfers, the deliberate deception of family members. She painted a picture not of confused miscommunication, but of calculated theft. "Your Honor," she concluded, "this wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. This was a systematic campaign to defraud the defendant's brother of his lawful inheritance, while he served his country overseas. The defendant didn't just steal money, she stole his place in the family, his connection to his grandmother's legacy, and his trust in the people he loved most." The judge listened to everything without expression, occasionally taking notes. Then she sat back and studied the courtroom for a long moment. "In my 30 years on this bench," she said finally, "I've seen greed destroy more families than war, addiction, and divorce combined. Money has a way of revealing who people really are when they think no one is watching." She looked directly at Rachel. "Ms. Vasquez-Chen, you didn't just steal from your brother. You stole from your grandmother's memory. You manipulated your parents' grief. You built a life on a foundation of lies. And when that foundation cracked, you brought down everyone around you." Then, unexpectedly, she looked at me. "Sergeant Vasquez, please stand." I rose, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't in the script. Patricia looked as surprised as I felt. "Sergeant, you served 2 tours overseas while your family believed you had abandoned them. You endured 2 years of silence while building a case against your own sister. You had every legal right to pursue the maximum penalties against the defendant." She paused, studying me. "What would you like to see happen here today?" The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear Mom crying, could feel Rachel's eyes on me for the first time since I'd entered the room. Everyone was waiting for my answer. I thought about Grandma Elena, about the values she'd tried to instill in us. I thought about the brother I'd been before I learned what betrayal felt like. I thought about the family dinners we'd never have again, the grandchildren Rachel's kids would be to parents they barely knew. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "I want my sister to face the full consequences of her choices. But I also want her to have the chance to rebuild her life honestly, to be the person our grandmother believed she could be. I don't want revenge. I want justice. And I want my family to heal, whatever that looks like." Judge Williams nodded slowly. "Ms. Vasquez-Chen, please stand." Rachel rose on shaking legs. "I sentence you to 5 years probation, during which you will repay every cent of the $780,000 inheritance to your brother, plus interest and legal fees. You will complete 1,000 hours of community service focusing on financial literacy education. You will undergo counseling for whatever drove you to betray your family so completely. And you will write a letter of apology to your grandmother's memory, to be read at her grave with your entire family present." She banged her gavel once. Court adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, I sat for a moment in the silence. Rachel approached slowly, her attorney having already left to avoid the media outside. "Marcus," she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. She looked tired, broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd built a life on stolen money. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not destroying me completely, for giving me a chance to make this right." I stood up, gathering my papers. "The chance to make it right was always there, Rachel. You just had to take it." Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions we didn't answer. Mom and Dad walked with me to the parking garage, the 3 of us moving in a bubble of exhausted silence. "What happens now?" Mom asked as we reached my car. I looked back at the courthouse, then at my parents. These 2 people who'd raised us with the best intentions and watched their children destroy each other over money that our grandmother had left to bring us together. "Now we learn how to be a family again," I said. "All of us." 6 months later, I was back in Jacksonville, but this time it felt different. Rachel had sold the Pinecrest house and moved into a modest apartment, using the proceeds to begin repaying the inheritance. She'd started working for a nonprofit that helped military families with financial planning, a form of community service that seemed almost too perfectly designed for penance. We had dinner once a month now, usually at Mom and Dad's house, sometimes just the four of us, sometimes with David, who'd decided to try reconciliation after months of counseling. The conversations were stilted at first, careful, like we were all walking on thin ice. But slowly, something like trust began to rebuild. Rachel had written the letter to Grandma Elena, a 3-page confession and apology that she'd read aloud at the cemetery while we all stood in a circle around the grave. She'd cried the entire time, and when she finished, Dad had put his hand on her shoulder in the first gesture of forgiveness he'd shown since the trial. I kept the receipt from every repayment Rachel made, not out of spite, but as a reminder that accountability and redemption were both possible, even after the most profound betrayals. The money was going into a trust anyway, half for my future children, half to fund a scholarship in Grandma Elena's name for military veterans pursuing higher education. My apartment overlooked Biscayne Bay, and on quiet evenings, I'd sit on the balcony and think about the choices we make when we think no one is watching. Rachel had chosen greed over family, lies over truth, immediate gain over long-term consequences. But she'd also chosen, eventually, to face the truth and begin making amends. I'd chosen silence over confrontation, patience over immediate action, justice over revenge. But I'd also chosen to give my sister a chance to redeem herself, rather than seeking maximum punishment. Neither of us was the same person we'd been before this started. The inheritance that was supposed to keep Grandma Elena's memory alive had nearly torn her legacy apart. But maybe, in the end, that was part of the lesson too. Money was just money. Family, broken and rebuilt, scarred and healing, was something else entirely. The final payment came on a Tuesday, delivered not by check or wire transfer, but by Rachel herself, who knocked on my door at 8 a.m. holding an envelope and wearing the kind of tired relief that comes from finally carrying through on something impossibly difficult. "It's done," she said simply. We sat on my balcony and drank coffee as the sun rose over the water. We didn't talk about the money, or the trial, or the years of silence. We talked about Grandma Elena's stories, about how she'd survived coming to this country with nothing, about how she'd always said that family wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up for each other especially when it was hard. "I don't expect forgiveness," Rachel said as she prepared to leave. "I know trust takes time to rebuild. Maybe a lifetime." "Maybe," I agreed. But Grandma Elena always said the hardest journeys were the most worthwhile ones. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since before everything went wrong. She also said that the strongest families were the ones that survived their worst storms. After she left, I stood on the balcony for a long time, watching Miami wake up around me. My phone buzzed with a message from my commanding officer about my next assignment. The military had kept me grounded in Jacksonville longer than usual, and it was time to move on. But this time, when I left, I wouldn't be leaving silence behind. I'd be leaving with the knowledge that even when families break apart, even when trust seems impossible to rebuild, even when silence seems safer than truth, there's always a path back to each other. It just requires the courage to take it. That evening I called Mom. "I'm being reassigned," I told her. "Oh, Marcus. Where?" "Germany. 2-year posting." Silence for a moment. Then, "Will you keep in touch this time?" "Every week," I promised. No more silence, Mom, from any of us. "Good," she said, and I could hear her smiling through the tears. "Grandma Elena would be proud of you both." I thought about that as I began packing, about what would have made our grandmother proud. Not the money, certainly. Not even the justice or the accountability, important as they were. I think what would have made her proud was that we'd found Our way back to Sunday dinners, to phone calls and shared memories, to being a family that had been broken but refused to stay that way. The inheritance she'd left us wasn't really the money at all. It was the lesson that love, like trust, like forgiveness, isn't a fixed quantity that gets divided up and depleted. It's something that grows stronger when shared, even when, especially, when sharing it requires the hardest conversations and the longest journeys back to each other. Some families are bound by blood, others by choice. The strongest families, I'd learned, are bound by the decision to keep showing up for each other, even when everything logical says they should walk away. 6 months later, settled into my new assignment in Ramstein, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph. Grandma Elena's kitchen table, surrounded by my parents, Rachel, David, and 2 people I didn't recognize, but who had Rachel's eyes and David's smile. On the back, in Rachel's handwriting, "Sunday dinner. You're missed but not forgotten. Next time, you cook." I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in years at that. Because Grandma Elena had tried to teach both of us to cook, and I'd been notably terrible at it. I put the photo on my desk next to my computer and went back to work. But first, I sent Rachel a message. "I'll bring the disaster when I come home for Christmas. Save me a seat." Her response came immediately. "Already saved. Always was." The military base in Germany was different from anything I'd experienced before. Ramstein was a bustling hub of international cooperation, where languages mixed in. The commissary and cultures blended in ways that reminded me why I'd chosen this life in the first place. But even surrounded by the constant activity of thousands of service members, I found myself replaying that moment in the courtroom when Judge Williams had called my name. That moment had changed everything, not just because justice was served, but because it taught me something profound about the power of speaking truth when it mattered most. The months following Rachel's sentencing had been a masterclass in rebuilding what seemed irreparable. And now, thousands of miles away from Miami's familiar chaos, I was learning to apply those lessons in ways I'd never expected. My new assignment was as a financial advisor for military families, a role that seemed almost cosmically designed for someone who'd just spent years dealing with inheritance fraud. The Army had a way of placing people where their experiences could serve others, even if the path there was unconventional. My commanding officer, Colonel Jennifer Hayes, was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd built her career on turning personal challenges into professional strengths. "Sergeant Vasquez," she said during our first meeting, "I understand you recently dealt with some family legal issues involving financial fraud. I'd like you to consider heading up our new financial literacy program for deployed personnel and their families." I'd been honest about the situation during my security clearance renewal, expecting it might complicate my career. Instead, it had opened a door I hadn't seen coming. "Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored." "Good. Because we're seeing an uptick in financial exploitation of military families, especially those with deployed members. Spouses, siblings, even parents taking advantage of service members who are overseas and unable to monitor their finances closely. Sound familiar? It did indeed. The program I developed over the following months wasn't just about budgeting and investments. It was about building systems that protected service members from the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. We created mandatory financial education courses, established protocols for monitoring accounts during deployment, and most importantly, we taught people to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation by family members. But the work that truly transformed me began when I started meeting one-on-one with military families who were already dealing with financial betrayal. Each story was unique, but the patterns were disturbingly similar. Trust exploited, isolation weaponized, silence used as a tool of manipulation. The first case that really hit home was Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a single mother whose ex-husband had drained their joint account while she was deployed to Afghanistan. Her parents had watched it happen and said nothing, believing his lies about her giving permission. When she tried to confront them after returning home, They accused her of being materialistic and prioritizing money over family. He told them I was having a mental breakdown overseas, Maria explained, sitting across from my desk with her young daughter coloring in the corner. Said the deployment had changed me, made me paranoid and aggressive. They believed him instead, of their own daughter who'd served her country for 15 years. I listened to her story, recognizing the familiar ache of family betrayal wrapped in good intentions. But I also heard something else, a determination that reminded me of the choice I'd made to build a case rather than simply react emotionally. "What do you want to do about it?" I asked. She looked surprised by the question. "What can I do? The money's gone. My parents think I'm the problem. My daughter barely knows her grandparents anymore because family gatherings are so tense." "Maria, can I tell you about my sister and what I learned about staying silent until the right moment?" Over the next hour, I shared my story. Not the dramatic courtroom moments that made for good headlines, but the quiet, strategic thinking that had preceded them. How silence hadn't been about giving up, but about building strength. How documentation had been more powerful than confrontation. How choosing the right moment to speak had made all the difference. "You stayed silent for 2 years?" she asked, incredulous. "Not silent exactly. I stayed strategically quiet while building an undeniable case. There's a difference between giving up your voice and choosing when to use it for maximum impact." Maria left that day with a plan, not just for pursuing the financial fraud, though we discussed that too, but for rebuilding relationships with her parents based on truth rather than manipulation. 6 months later, she sent me a photo of her daughter's birthday party, surrounded by family members who'd finally learned what really happened during her deployment. But it was Master Sergeant James Wright's case that taught me the most about the ripple effects of choosing justice over revenge. James had discovered that his brother had used his military power of attorney to sell family land in Texas that had been in their family for generations. The brother had gambling debts and had convinced their aging father that James had agreed to the sale to help with the family's finances. "I want to destroy him," James said during our first meeting. His hands clenched so tightly, his knuckles were white. "I want him to lose everything like he cost me everything." I recognized that rage. It had lived in my chest for months before I'd learned to channel it into something more productive. "James, I understand that anger. I lived with it myself. But let me ask you something. What would winning actually look like for you?" He paused, confused by the question. "Getting my land back, making him pay. And then what? Your relationship with your father? Your nephew who looks up to his dad? Your family gatherings for the next 20 years? It took several sessions. But James eventually chose a path similar to mine. He built a case, pursued legal recourse, and recovered the land. But more importantly, he worked with family counselors to address the underlying issues: his brother's gambling addiction, their father's cognitive decline, and the family's pattern of avoiding difficult conversations. The land was restored to James, but his brother got help for his addiction, and the family developed systems to protect their father from future manipulation. A year later, James sent me a video of his nephew helping him plant new trees on the recovered property, talking excitedly about the family farm he'd inherit someday. These experiences began to reshape my understanding of what justice really meant. It wasn't just about punishment or restitution. It was about creating conditions where healing could happen and future harm could be prevented. I started incorporating these insights into our financial literacy program, but also into something larger: a mentorship program for military personnel dealing with family betrayal. We called it Silent Strength, named for the period of strategic silence that often preceded effective action. The program paired people who'd been through family financial betrayal with those currently experiencing it. Not as a support group, though emotional support was part of it, but as a tactical training ground. We taught people how to document abuse, how to build legal cases, how to communicate with law enforcement and attorneys, and most importantly, how to make decisions based on long-term healing rather than short-term satisfaction. One of my most memorable mentees was Airman First Class Kevin Park, whose stepmother had convinced his father to remove Kevin from the family will after Kevin came out as gay during his first deployment. She'd told the family that Kevin's lifestyle went against their values, and that supporting him financially would be enabling his choices. Kevin's pain wasn't just about the money. It was about watching his father choose a second wife over the son he'd raised alone for 16 years. She isolated him from everyone who might question her, Kevin explained during one of our sessions. Convinced him that his old friends were bad influences, that I was a bad influence. By the time I came home on leave, he was like a different person. Working with Kevin taught me new dimensions of family manipulation that went beyond simple greed. His stepmother had used his father's grief over Kevin's mother's death, his unfamiliarity with social changes around LGBTQ+ acceptance, and his isolation during Kevin's deployment to completely reshape the family narrative. But Kevin was brilliant in ways that reminded me of my own strategic thinking. Instead of confronting his father directly or trying to expose his stepmother, immediately, he began documenting everything. He recorded conversations, saved text messages, gathered evidence of financial impropriety. Because when you're stealing an inheritance, there are usually other financial crimes happening too. More importantly, Kevin began rebuilding his relationship with his father slowly, patiently. He'd visit when his stepmother wasn't around, share aspects of his military service that his father could be proud of, and gradually reintroduce him to family friends who'd been pushed away. It's not about changing his mind about my sexuality overnight, Kevin explained. It's about reminding him who I've always been to him, beyond whatever fear she's planted. The breakthrough came during Father's Day weekend. Kevin had arranged for his dad to visit him on base in Colorado, away from his stepmother's influence. They spent 3 days fishing, talking, and slowly unpacking years of manipulated communication. "She said you'd rejected us," his father finally admitted on the last day. "Said you'd told her you didn't want anything to do with our backwards family." Kevin had prepared for this moment, not with accusations or anger, but with evidence, screenshots of his unanswered messages, records of gifts he'd sent that were never acknowledged, photos of himself in uniform that he'd mailed home and never heard about. "Dad, when have I ever said anything like that to anyone?" The legal case that followed was swift. The stepmother had not only manipulated the will, but had embezzled from his father's business account and committed tax fraud in the process. But more importantly than the legal victory was watching Kevin's father emerge from what amounted to years of psychological manipulation. Kevin's story became part of our training program because it illustrated something crucial. Sometimes the family member doing the betraying isn't the one who needs the most help. It's the one being manipulated into betraying you. As the silent strength program grew, I started seeing patterns that extended far beyond financial fraud. Military families were particularly vulnerable to certain types of manipulation because deployment created distance, communication challenges, and power imbalances within families. But they were also uniquely equipped to fight back because of their training in strategic thinking, documentation, and long-term planning. Colonel Hayes noticed the program's success and recommended me for a special assignment, developing a curriculum for the entire European command about family financial security. It meant traveling to bases across Germany, Italy, Britain, and Eastern Europe, sharing what we'd learned and training others to implement similar programs. Each base I visited had its own stories, its own families torn apart by greed or manipulation. But they also had their own success stories, people who'd chosen strategic action over emotional reaction, who'd built legal cases instead of burning bridges, who'd found ways to achieve justice while leaving room for redemption. At a base in Italy, I met Technical Sergeant Lisa Chen, who'd discovered her mother had been allowing her abusive ex-husband access to Lisa's bank account. "For emergencies," her mother had said, not realizing he'd been systematically draining it for months. "My mom is the sweetest person in the world," Lisa told me. "She just wanted to help, and he manipulated her good nature. How do I protect my finances without making her feel guilty for trusting the wrong person?" Lisa's solution was elegant. She created a family emergency fund that her mother could access, but with built-in safeguards and transparency. Her mother got to keep her role as family caretaker, but within structure that prevented abuse. The ex-husband's access was eliminated, but in a way that educated Lisa's mother rather than shaming her. In England, I worked with senior airman Marcus Johnson. We laughed about the shared name, whose gambling-addicted brother had stolen the down payment Marcus had been saving for his first home. But instead of simply pursuing charges, Marcus used the situation as an intervention opportunity. He worked with addiction counselors, created a structured repayment plan, and actually ended up closer to his brother than they'd been in years. "It turned out he wasn't a bad person," Marcus explained. "He was a sick person whose illness hurt people he loved. There's a difference, and that difference matters when you're deciding how to respond." These stories began to coalesce into a philosophy that went beyond just protecting yourself from family financial abuse. They formed a framework for thinking about family conflict in general. Document everything. Seek to understand the full picture before reacting. Choose responses that preserve the possibility of eventual reconciliation without enabling continued harm. Address root causes, not just symptoms. But perhaps the most important lesson came from an unexpected source: a letter from Rachel. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to my APO address with familiar handwriting that still made my stomach tighten. I'd been in Germany for 8 months by then, and our monthly phone calls had become routine but careful, like dancers who'd learned each other's steps, but still worried about missteps. "Dear Marcus," it began, "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but I need your advice. David's sister is going through something similar to what I put you through, but she's the victim this time. Her husband emptied their joint accounts and disappeared, and her family is treating her like it's her fault. She's talking about staying quiet to keep the peace, and it's breaking my heart because I know exactly what that kind of silence costs." The letter went on to describe a woman trapped in the same cycle of family manipulation and enforced silence that had allowed Rachel's theft to continue for so long. But what struck me wasn't the story itself. It was Rachel's insight into how destructive that silence had been. "I see now what I stole from you," she wrote. "It wasn't just money. It was your voice in our family. It was your right to trust the people who said they loved you. I made you feel like you had to choose between having a family and having justice, when the truth is, we can't have a real family without justice." I called her that night, and for the first time since before my deployment, we talked not about schedules or repayment plans, but about the deeper lessons we'd both learned. "I've been working with military families going through similar situations," I told her. "And you're right. Silence doesn't keep families together. It just lets the loudest person control the narrative." "That's what I told David's sister," Rachel said. "I said that staying quiet feels like taking the high road, but it's actually abandoning the battlefield to people who'll use your absence to rewrite history." We talked for 2 hours that night, and something shifted between us. Not forgiveness. Exactly. That was still a work in progress. But understanding. Rachel wasn't just making amends by paying back money. She was applying the lessons of our experience to help other people avoid the same pain. "Can I ask you something?" she said before we hung up. "Of course." That moment in court, when the judge asked what you wanted to see happen, "You could have destroyed me completely. Why didn't you?" I'd been asked versions of this question by dozens of service members, and I'd given various answers depending on the situation. But with Rachel, I wanted to be completely honest. Because Grandma Elena always said that the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, it's whether they learn from them and help others avoid making the same ones. I wanted to give you the chance to prove her right. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. I'm trying to prove her right every day, Rachel finally said, even if it takes the rest of my life. After that conversation, I started incorporating Rachel's insights into our training program, not her name or our specific story, but the principle she'd articulated. Silence in the face of family financial abuse doesn't preserve relationships. It gives abusers permission to continue and victims the false hope that peace can exist alongside injustice. We developed a new module called Breaking the Silence Cycle, which taught people how to distinguish between choosing your battles and enabling harm through inaction. The module included role-playing exercises where people practiced having difficult conversations with family members, strategies for documenting abuse while maintaining relationships where possible, and most importantly, frameworks for deciding when silence was strategic and when it was simply avoidance. One of the most powerful exercises we developed was called Letters to Your Future Self. Participants would write letters describing what they wanted their family relationships to look like in 5 years, then work backward to identify what actions they needed to take now to make that future possible. Master Sergeant Williams, whose ex-wife had stolen his GI Bill benefits by forging his signature, wrote in his letter, "I want to be able to have dinner with my kids without them feeling like they have to choose between their mom and dad. I want them to understand that what she did was wrong, but that doesn't make her a completely bad person. I want justice, but I also want healing." His path to that future involved prosecuting the fraud, because stealing educational benefits affected not just him but his children's security, while also working with counselors to help his kids process the complicated reality of loving someone who'd done something wrong. The success stories kept multiplying. Families that had seemed irreparably broken found ways to rebuild on foundations of truth rather than silence. Legal cases that could have destroyed relationships instead became opportunities for accountability and growth. But perhaps the most important development was watching people discover their own strength. So many service members who came to our program felt helpless, betrayed, isolated. They'd trusted family members who'd exploited that trust, and they felt naive for believing the best of people they loved. What they learned was that trust wasn't naive. Exploitation of trust was criminal. That wanting to believe the best of family wasn't weakness. It was an expression of the values that made them good soldiers, good parents, good people. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez summed it up perfectly during one of our group sessions. I thought, being strong meant taking whatever my family dished out without complaint. But real strength is knowing when to speak up, when to fight back, and when to set boundaries that protect everyone involved. The program expanded beyond European Command. Other regions requested our curriculum. Military family life counselors integrated our materials into their practice. Most significantly, the Department of Defense began developing policies that better protected service members' financial assets during deployment and created clearer reporting mechanisms for family financial abuse. But for me, the most meaningful validation came in an unexpected form: a visit from Judge Patricia Williams, who was touring military installations in Europe as part of a judicial education exchange program. I recognized her immediately when she walked into our training facility at Ramstein, and she clearly remembered me as well. "Sergeant Vasquez," she said with a smile, "I heard about the work you're doing here. I'm not surprised." We talked after. Her presentation about military justice systems. She'd sought me out specifically because she'd heard about our program through legal channels. "That moment in my courtroom when I asked what you wanted to see happen," she said, "I wasn't just being dramatic. I was testing something." "Testing what, Your Honor?" "Whether you understood the difference between justice and revenge. whether you'd learned that the point of accountability isn't just punishment, it's prevention. Creating systems and understanding that make future harm less likely. She gestured toward our training materials. This is what that looks like. You took your experience and used it to prevent others from going through the same thing. That's the highest form of justice. Judge Williams spent the day observing our training sessions and left with copies of our curriculum to share with family courts back in the States. But more importantly, she validated something I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate: that my experience with Rachel hadn't just been about recovering stolen money or even rebuilding our family. It had been about learning to transform pain into purpose, betrayal into wisdom, individual justice into systemic change. That evening, I called home for our monthly family dinner call. It was something we'd started 6 months earlier, a video call every second Sunday where Mom, Dad, Rachel, David, and I would eat dinner together across multiple time zones. "You look happy, mijo," Mom said, squinting at her phone screen. "I am happy, Mom. Different kind of happy than I expected, but genuine." "What kind of happy?" Dad asked. He'd started talking more during these calls, as if the structured format made it easier for him to express himself. "The kind that comes from knowing that the worst thing that happened to me became the foundation for helping other people. That the silence I lived with for 2 years gave me the patience to help others find their voices." Rachel, who'd been quietly feeding her twin daughters while listening, looked up. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. David and I are moving to San Antonio. The nonprofit I work for is opening a new office there, focused specifically on helping military families with financial recovery after abuse." "That's amazing, Rachel." "It's because of what I learned from watching how you handled everything. How you turned something destructive into something constructive. I want to do that too." David spoke up. "We're also thinking about starting a family foundation, using some of the skills Rachel learned in real estate, but ethically this time. Helping veterans buy homes, creating financial literacy programs, things that would make Grandma Elena proud." "She'd be proud of all of you already," Dad said, quietly. "Proud of who you became after everything fell apart." That night, after the call ended, I stood on my balcony overlooking the German countryside and thought about the journey that had brought me here. 3 years ago, I'd been an angry soldier discovering that his sister had stolen his inheritance. Now I was someone who helped others transform their own betrayals into something meaningful. The money Rachel stole, every cent of it had been repaid with interest. But the real inheritance Grandma Elena had left us wasn't money at all. It was the understanding that families aren't just built by blood or shared history, but by the choice to keep showing up for each other, especially after trust has been broken and rebuilt. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to the Silent Strength Program group chat. "Remember, your silence in the aftermath of betrayal doesn't make you weak. It can be the gathering of strength before you change everything, for yourself and for others who'll come after you." Responses came in immediately from service members across 3 continents. Stories of courage, of boundaries set and maintained, of legal cases won and families slowly healed. Of people who'd learned that justice wasn't just about individual vindication. It was about creating a world where trust was protected and betrayal had consequences. As I headed inside to prepare for another day of training, I thought about something Judge Williams had said. True justice creates conditions where the harm is less likely to happen again. That's what we were building here, one family at a time. One difficult conversation at a time. One strategic silence transformed into powerful speech at a time. The program would continue to grow, to spread, to help more people find their way through the darkness of family betrayal towards something that looked like justice, healing, and eventually, hope. But that night, as I fell asleep in a small apartment, thousands of miles from where my story began, I wasn't thinking about the future impact of our work. I was thinking about Grandma Elena, about a promise kept in the most unexpected way, and about the truth that sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is by helping others find what we almost lost ourselves, the courage to speak up when it matters most. After serving overseas, Marcus returned home to discover his sister Rachel had stolen his $780,000 inheritance through forged documents while he was deployed. Instead of immediate confrontation, Marcus chose strategic silence, spending 2 years building an undeniable legal case. When Judge Williams called him forward in court and asked what he wanted to see happen, Marcus chose justice over revenge, leading to Rachel's conviction and the beginning of family healing. Now stationed in Germany, Marcus has transformed his experience into a military program helping other service members deal with family financial betrayal, turning his painful past into meaningful purpose. Sergeant Vasquez, General Morrison's voice carried an urgency I'd never heard before. I need you to catch the next flight to San Antonio. We have a situation involving a military family that's about to explode into a national scandal, and your unique expertise, both professional and personal, is the only thing that might prevent it. The red-eye flight to Texas gave me time. To review the case files, General Morrison had rushed to my secure email. Master Sergeant Angela Torres, a decorated combat veteran with 3 tours in Afghanistan, had discovered that her son-in-law had systematically stolen over $400,000 from multiple family members using his position as her daughter's power of attorney while she was deployed. But the twist that made this particularly volatile was that the son-in-law was the son of a prominent congressman, and the media had gotten hold of the story before the military could address it internally. Military hero's own family betrayal. Exposed, read the Washington Post headline that had been sent to my phone during the flight. The story painted Master Sergeant Torres as naive for trusting family, questioned military policies around power of attorney, and worst of all, suggested that the military was protecting the congressman's son because of political connections. Landing in San Antonio at dawn, I was met by a team that included Dr. Walsh, who'd flown down from D.C., a military attorney from the JAG Corps, and most surprisingly, Rachel. She was there in her capacity as a family financial recovery specialist, but seeing her at the airport brought back a flood of memories from my own return home 3 years earlier. "Thank you for coming," she said simply as we walked toward the terminal. Angela Torres specifically requested that I be part of the team. She said she wanted someone who understood what it felt like to have your family's dirty laundry become public entertainment. Master Sergeant Torres met us at Lackland Air Force Base, and the moment I saw her, I recognized something I'd seen in a mirror years ago. The particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being betrayed by someone you loved and then having to defend your pain to strangers. "Sergeant Vasquez," she said, standing at attention despite the informal setting. "Thank you for coming. I'm not sure what you can do that lawyers and investigators haven't already tried, but General Morrison said you might understand the complexities." Angela Torres was a woman of military bearing and obvious strength, but I could see the cracks. Her daughter, Maria, sat beside her, visibly pregnant and trying not to cry. The son-in-law, Jason Crawford, had disappeared 3 days ago when the investigation became public, leaving behind a pregnant wife, massive debts in other people's names, and a family in ruins. "Tell me what happened," I said, sitting across from them in the base family services office. Not the version for investigators or lawyers, the real version. Maria spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jason was so supportive when Mom deployed. He helped me manage everything: bills, accounts, communication with Mom overseas. He convinced me to give him power of attorney so he could handle financial emergencies while Mom was gone. He said it was just to help." "He was charming," Angela added, her jaw tight. "Always had explanation for everything. When I'd video call and ask about family finances, he'd have charts and spreadsheets showing how he was investing our money, saving us money, making everything more efficient." "What changed?" Dr. Walsh asked gently. I came home early, Angela said. Medical leave after an IED incident. Jason wasn't expecting me for another 2 months. When I went to access my accounts, everything was gone. Not just my savings, he'd taken out loans against my retirement, used my credit to buy properties that he then sold and pocketed the profits. But here's the part that really hurts, Maria said, tears finally flowing. When I confronted him, when I said I was going to call my mom, he told me she already knew. He said she'd given him permission to invest her money however he wanted because she trusted him more than she trusted military financial advisors. Angela's hands clenched into fists. He had me convinced that Maria was in on it, that they were both manipulating me. He showed me texts that looked like they were from her, agreeing to different financial decisions. Later, I found out he'd been sending those texts to himself using a spoofed number. The psychological manipulation was staggering in its sophistication. Jason hadn't just stolen money. He'd systematically destroyed the trust between mother and daughter, created fictional conflicts to explain financial discrepancies, and used his position as a privileged congressional family member to intimidate anyone who questioned him. The media attention is destroying what's left of our family, Maria said. Reporters are camping outside my apartment. People are saying I had to know what he was doing, that I'm just playing victim. Meanwhile, he's probably in the Cayman Islands somewhere, and I'm left 8 months pregnant trying to rebuild my life. I understood now why General Morrison had called me specifically. This wasn't just a financial fraud case. It was a masterclass in family manipulation that threatened to become a political scandal that would harm military families everywhere. Angela, I said, using her first name. Deliberately, I know you've been focusing on the legal aspects of this, but I want to talk about what happens after. What do you want your relationship with Maria to look like 5 years from now? She looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. I just want the money back. I want him to pay for what he did. I want my daughter to understand that I never would have let this happen if I'd known. But what if you can't get all the money back? What if he never faces consequences? What if the media continues to paint you both as naive victims? What if Congressman Crawford uses his influence to make this disappear? What do you do then? Angela's military composure finally cracked. I don't know. I feel like I failed my daughter by trusting the wrong person. I failed my country by being an easy mark. I failed my own mother, who saved for 40 years to leave me that inheritance that's now gone. Rachel had been silent through most of the conversation, but now she leaned forward. Angela, can I tell you what my brother told? Me in court when he could have destroyed my life completely? Angela nodded. He said he didn't want revenge. He wanted justice. And he wanted his family to heal, whatever that looked like. At the time, I thought he was being soft. Now I understand he was being strategic. He was thinking beyond the immediate satisfaction of seeing me punished and toward a future where we could both live with what had happened. But I'm not the one who did anything wrong here, Angela protested. Neither was Marcus, I interjected. The question isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about what you do next that either empowers you or keeps you trapped in victim mindset. Forever. Over the next week, working with the team Dr. Walsh and I had assembled, we developed what we called the Torres Protocol, a comprehensive approach to handling high-profile family financial betrayal cases that involved media attention and political complications. The first phase focused on damage control and security. We moved Angela and Maria to a secure location on base, away from media attention. We brought in military security experts to protect them from harassment and potential retaliation from the Crawford family, who had significant political influence. Phase 2 involved immediate financial stabilization. Working with JAG lawyers and financial forensics experts, we began the legal process of recovering assets while also creating a sustainable financial plan for Angela and Maria going forward. This included applying for emergency military hardship funds, restructuring debts that had been incurred in their names without authorization, and establishing new, secure financial accounts. But Phase 3 was where our unique approach really made a difference. Instead of hiding from the media attention, we chose to use it strategically. "The story the media is telling about you isn't the whole truth," I told Angela during one of our strategy sessions. "But rather than just defending against their narrative, we're going to create a better one. One that empowers other military families and makes it harder for people like Jason to victimize people in the future." Working with a military public affairs specialist and a media consultant who specialized in crisis communication, we developed a public response strategy that shifted the narrative from naive military family duped by con artist to strong military family fighting back against sophisticated financial predator. Angela's first public statement was powerful in its simplicity. "My family trusted someone who weaponized that trust against us. We're not the first military family this has happened to, and without systemic changes, we won't be the last. Instead of hiding in shame, we're going to fight back. Not just for ourselves, but for every military family that deserves better protection." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, Angela had received messages from over 200 military families who'd experienced similar betrayals. News organizations shifted their coverage from sensationalism to policy analysis. Most importantly, congressional leadership began distancing themselves from Congressman Crawford and calling for investigations into his son's activities. But the real breakthrough came when Maria decided to share her own story publicly. "I want other military spouses to know that you can love someone and still be completely fooled by them," she said during a television interview that Rachel and I helped her prepare for. "Jason didn't just steal money. He stole my sense of reality. He made me question my own mother's character, doubt my own perceptions, and feel guilty for being victimized. That's not love. That's manipulation. And it's not your fault if it happens to you." Maria's courage in speaking out sparked something unexpected. A national conversation about financial abuse in military families that led to congressional hearings, policy changes, and ultimately new protections for deployed service members. The Crawford family's political influence began working against them as media attention intensified. Congressman Crawford was forced to recuse himself from all military affairs committees. Jason was located in Costa Rica within 2 weeks and extradited back to the United States to face federal charges. But for me, the most meaningful moment came during a family session a month into our work with the Torres family. Angela, Maria, and Maria's newborn daughter, Sophia, sat together in a conference room at the base family center. "I keep thinking about what you said that first day," Angela told me, "about what I wanted my relationship with Maria to look like in 5 years. I realized I'd been so focused on the betrayal that I hadn't thought about the rebuild." "And?" I prompted. Maria spoke up, holding baby Sophia against her shoulder. "We're not the same people we were before this happened. Jason changed us, damaged us. But we're not broken. We're different, maybe stronger in ways we didn't expect." "Stronger how?" "We don't take trust for granted anymore," Angela said. "But that doesn't mean we're closed off. It means we're more intentional about who we trust and how. We have better boundaries, better communication, better systems for protecting ourselves. And Sophia is going to grow up in a family that knows the difference between unconditional love and enabling harmful behavior," Maria added. "She'll know that being family doesn't mean accepting abuse, and that you can hold people accountable while still loving them." The Torres case became a landmark in military family financial protection. The legal precedents set by Jason's prosecution, the policy changes implemented based on Angela and Maria's testimony, and the public awareness raised by their willingness to speak out prevented countless other families from experiencing similar betrayals. But beyond the systemic impact, Angela and Maria's journey illustrated something profound about resilience that I'd learned from my own experience with Rachel. Betrayal doesn't have to define you, but how you respond to it absolutely will. 6 months after our initial meeting, I received a photo from Maria. Angela, in her dress uniform, receiving a commendation for her advocacy work on military family financial protection, with baby Sophia sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms in the audience. The accompanying text read, "Marcus, thank you for helping us understand that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about creating a world where what happened to us is less likely to happen to others. We're not victims anymore. We're advocates." That photo sits on my desk at the Pentagon next to one from Rachel's nonprofit graduation ceremony, where she was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for her work helping military families. Both images remind me daily that the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for the best things we do for others. Our work with the Torres family led to the development of the Military Family Trust Recovery Initiative, a comprehensive program that combines legal support, financial restoration, therapeutic intervention, and advocacy training for families affected by financial betrayal. The program has been implemented at over 100 military installations and has helped thousands of families rebuild their lives after betrayal. But perhaps more importantly, it's changed how the military thinks about family financial protection. New protocols require multiple authorizations for major financial decisions during deployments. Financial literacy training now includes specific modules on recognizing and preventing family financial abuse. Most significantly, there's now a presumption in military justice that family financial betrayal is never just about money. It's about power, control, and the weaponization of trust. The success of these initiatives led to my promotion to Master Sergeant and a new role as Director of Military Family Resilience Programs. The position comes with a staff of 12, a substantial budget, and the mandate to continue developing innovative approaches to protecting military families from all forms of exploitation. Rachel visited D.C. last month for a conference on family financial recovery, and we had dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the Potomac. It was the first time we'd spoken in person since my return from Germany. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd handled things differently that night you came home?" she asked over dessert. "You mean if I'd confronted you immediately, created a scene, demanded answers?" "Yeah." I thought about it. Seriously. Honestly, I think we'd both still be angry. You'd be in prison instead of running a nonprofit that's helped hundreds of families. I'd be bitter instead of doing work that gives my life meaning. Our parents would still be choosing sides instead of facilitating workshops for other families dealing with financial betrayal. So you think the silence was worth it? The strategic silence was worth it. The thoughtful planning was worth it. The decision to seek justice instead of revenge was worth it. But Rachel, the most important thing wasn't the silence. It was what I did with the time that silence gave me. And what you chose to do afterward. She nodded slowly. Sometimes I wish I could go back and tell my past self that the quick money would cost me everything that actually mattered. But then I think about all the families we've helped, all the people who won't go through what we went through because of the work we're both doing now. Grandma Elena used to say that wisdom is just pain that's been properly processed. She was right about a lot of things, Rachel agreed, including the fact that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up, especially when it's hard. That evening, walking along the National Mall after dinner, I thought about the journey that had brought us both to this point. 3 years ago, I was an angry soldier discovering his inheritance had been stolen. Rachel was a desperate woman who'd prioritized immediate financial security over family trust. Now, she was an advocate whose work had helped military families recover over $2 million in stolen assets. I was developing programs that protected hundreds of thousands of service members from financial exploitation by family members. Our grandmother's inheritance, the $780,000 that had started this entire saga, had been fully repaid with interest. But the real inheritance she'd left us was something far more valuable. The understanding that families are rebuilt not by pretending betrayal didn't happen, but by facing it honestly and choosing to create something better from the ruins. My phone buzzed with a text from General Morrison. Congress just approved funding for national expansion of our Family Trust Recovery Initiative. You've officially changed how America protects military families. Well done, Master Sergeant. I showed the message to Rachel, who smiled with genuine pride. You know what Grandma Elena would say about all this? What? She'd say we took the worst thing that ever happened to our family and turned it into the best thing we ever did for other families. She'd say that's what resilience really looks like. As we stood there in the shadow of the Washington Monument, surrounded by the memorials to those who'd sacrificed for their country, I realized that our story had become something bigger than personal betrayal and redemption. It had become proof that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt stronger than before, not by forgetting what happened, but by using what happened to create something that serves others. The inheritance Rachel stole had been recovered. The programs we'd built had helped thousands. The family that had been shattered had been rebuilt on foundations of truth, accountability, and shared purpose. But the most important inheritance of all was one that continued to grow every day. The knowledge that the right response to betrayal isn't revenge or surrender, but the long, patient work of turning pain into protection for others, silence into strategic action, and broken trust into systems that make future trust more secure. That night, I called our parents for our weekly family video call. As our faces appeared on the screen, Mom and Dad in Miami, Rachel joining from San Antonio, me from my Arlington apartment, I was struck by how different we all looked. Older, certainly, but also more settled, more intentional, more honest, with each other than we'd ever been. Any updates from your various world-changing endeavors? Dad asked with the dry humor that had remained constant through all our family's changes. Rachel shared news from her nonprofit. I talked about the congressional funding approval. Mom mentioned the family financial literacy workshop she and Dad were facilitating for military retirees in Miami. But the conversation that mattered most happened after the formal call ended, when just Rachel and I stayed on the line. Marcus, I need to tell you something, she said. I've been offered a position with the Department of Veterans Affairs, heading up their new Family Financial Recovery Division. It would mean moving to D.C., working closely with your Pentagon programs. What do you think about that? I think Grandma Elena would find it hilarious that her 2 grandchildren who once fought over money are now working together to help other families fight for theirs. Is that a yes? That's a yes. If you're okay working with your reformed felon of a sister. Rachel, you were never defined by the worst thing you did. And I'm proud of who you've become because of how you've faced what you did. The conversation ended with plans for Rachel to visit D.C. the following month to discuss the potential role. But as I sat in my apartment afterward, looking out at the lights of the nation's capital, I thought about something Judge Williams had said years ago. True justice creates conditions where the harm is less likely to happen again. That's what we'd built together, siblings who'd destroyed each other's trust and then spent years rebuilding it into something that protected thousands of other families. We'd taken our grandmother's inheritance of money and transformed it into an inheritance of protection, wisdom, and resilience that would outlast all of us. The money Rachel stole had been repaid in full. The trust she'd broken had been rebuilt stronger than before. The silence I'd maintained had become the foundation for helping others find their voice. But the most valuable inheritance of all was the one we were still building. A legacy of families who stayed together not because betrayal didn't happen, but because they learned to face it honestly, respond to it wisely, and use it as a foundation for creating something better. As I prepared for bed, I set my phone on the nightstand next to the photo from the Torres family and the letter from Rachel's nonprofit. Tomorrow would bring new families dealing with financial betrayal, new challenges to address, new stories of trust broken and rebuilt. But tonight, I fell asleep knowing that Grandma Elena's real inheritance, the belief that families are worth fighting for, especially when fighting means holding each other accountable with love, was alive and growing in ways she could never have imagined. After serving overseas, Marcus returned home to discover his sister Rachel had stolen his $780,000 inheritance through forged documents while he was deployed. Instead of immediate confrontation, Marcus chose strategic silence, building an undeniable legal case over 2 years. When called forward in court, Marcus chose justice over revenge, leading to family healing. From his base in Germany, Marcus transformed his experience into programs helping military families deal with financial betrayal. Back in the U.S., Marcus expanded these initiatives nationally, working with the Pentagon and Congress. His sister Rachel, now running a nonprofit for military families, began rebuilding their relationship through shared purpose. Together, they helped high-profile cases like the Torres family, creating systemic change in military family financial protection. 5 years after that courtroom moment that changed everything, I stood before the largest gathering of military family advocates in U.S. history. The National Military Family Resilience Summit had drawn over 3,000 attendees to Washington, D.C., including service members, family advocates, policymakers, and survivors of family financial betrayal from around the world. Rachel stood beside me on the stage, both of us wearing our dress uniforms. Mine military, hers the formal attire of her new role as Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs for Family Financial Security. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that the two people who'd once nearly destroyed their family over money were now the keynote speakers at an event dedicated to protecting families from financial exploitation. 5 years ago, I began, looking out at an audience that included families we'd helped, officers we'd trained, and policymakers who'd implemented our recommendations. My sister and I learned the hardest way possible that trust is both the most valuable thing a family possesses and the most dangerous weapon one family member can use against another. A hush fell over the auditorium. Many in the audience knew our story, but hearing it acknowledged publicly, together, still carried emotional weight. Rachel stepped forward. What Marcus won't tell you is that when I forged his signature and stole his inheritance, I didn't just take money. I took his faith in family, his sense of security, and his right to grieve our grandmother's death while serving his country, overseas. I replaced his trust with paranoia, his love with legal documents, and his homecoming with betrayal. The audience was completely silent. You could hear people shifting in their seats, some crying quietly. But here's what I learned. From how my brother responded, Rachel continued, her voice stronger now. He could have destroyed me completely. In court, when the judge asked what he wanted to see happen, Marcus had the power to ensure I lost everything. My freedom, my future, any chance at redemption. Instead, he chose something harder than revenge. He chose accountability paired with the possibility of healing. I picked up where she left off. The programs we've built together over the past 5 years have helped over 50,000 military families recover from financial betrayal. We've changed federal laws, military protocols, and most importantly, we've proven that families can survive even profound violations of trust if they're willing to do the hard work of honest reconstruction. The presentation that followed showcased the evolution of our work from a small program at Ramstein Air Base to a comprehensive national initiative. But what seemed to resonate most with the audience weren't the statistics or policy changes. It was the stories of transformation. We shared the story of Colonel Jennifer Walsh, whose gambling-addicted son had stolen her retirement savings, but who now ran a support group for military parents dealing with adult children's addiction. We talked about Major David Chen, whose ex-wife had emptied their joint accounts, who now taught financial literacy to newly divorced service members. Most powerfully, we introduced Sergeant First Class Maria Torres Kowalski, whose public fight against her fraudulent son-in-law had inspired congressional legislation protecting military families from sophisticated financial scams. Each of these families faced a choice, Rachel explained. Stay silent and hope the pain would go away, or speak up and risk making things worse. What our programs have learned is that there's a third option: strategic action that seeks justice, while preserving the possibility of healing. After our presentation, during the networking break, a young Navy spouse approached us. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park looked nervous but determined as she waited for the crowd around us to thin. "Ma'am, sir," she said, addressing both of us. "I've been following your work for 2 years, ever since my mother-in-law convinced my husband to sign over power of attorney to her while he was deployed. She used it to mortgage our house and drain our savings. My husband still doesn't believe it wasn't a mistake, still thinks his mother was just trying to help with some financial emergency." Rachel and I exchanged glances. We'd seen this pattern dozens of times, the family member caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to the victim and unwillingness to believe a loved one capable of deliberate fraud. "What makes your situation particularly challenging?" I asked. "She's convinced my husband that I'm the one trying to drive a wedge between him and his family. She shows him out-of-context texts, documents that make it look like I've been hiding financial information from him. Meanwhile, she's been using our credit to fund her lifestyle while we struggle to pay for childcare on my single income." "Sarah," Rachel said gently, "this is exactly the kind of sophisticated family manipulation that requires a coordinated response. Are you free for coffee later? I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Walsh and some of our family mediation specialists. What you're describing isn't just financial fraud, it's a deliberate campaign to isolate you from your support system." That evening, Rachel and I found ourselves in a familiar pattern, sitting up late in my apartment, reviewing cases and strategizing approaches. But this time felt different. The adversarial tension that had defined our relationship for so many years had been replaced by something more powerful: shared mission. "Marcus, can I ask you something I've never had the courage to ask before?" Rachel said, setting down her coffee and looking directly at me. "Of course." "Do you ever resent that our reconciliation happened because of work? That we only rebuilt our relationship because of what we could accomplish together?" I'd been expecting this question for months, maybe years. "Do you mean, do I wish we'd found our way back to each other just because we're family?" "Yeah," I thought carefully before answering. "Rachel, I think what happened with our inheritance revealed who we really were at that point in our lives. You were someone who would prioritize financial security over family trust. I was someone who would choose strategic silence over immediate confrontation. We weren't people who could just hug it out and pretend nothing happened." She nodded, tears starting to form. "But the work we've done together, helping other families, building these programs, changing how the military protects families from financial exploitation, that work revealed who we could become. Not who we used to be, but who we chose to be after we'd both seen the worst in ourselves and each other. So you don't think our relationship is just professional collaboration? Rachel, you're one of the few people in the world who truly understands what it feels like to have your family betrayal become a public story. You know what it's like to rebuild trust one small action at a time. You know what it takes to transform pain into purpose. Our relationship isn't built on shared history anymore. It's built on shared growth." She wiped her eyes and smiled. "Grandma Elena would probably say we took the long way around, but we got where we needed to be." The next day brought news that would test everything we'd built. An investigative journalist named David Chang had published a series of articles questioning the effectiveness of our programs, alleging that we were using our personal story to profit from other families' pain. The articles suggested that our success stories were exaggerated, that our reconciliation was performative, and that military families would be better served by traditional financial counseling rather than our experimental approaches. The accusations stung not because they were entirely false, but because they contained just enough truth to plant doubt. We had become public figures, our programs did receive substantial government funding. We had written books and given paid speeches about our experience. How do we respond to this? Rachel asked during an emergency video call with our senior staff. Dr. Walsh, who'd been with us since the early days in Germany, spoke first. We respond with transparency and data. Open our books, our methods, our outcomes to independent review. Let the work speak for itself. General Morrison, participating from her Pentagon office, agreed. In my experience, the best response to accusations of profiting from pain is to demonstrate measurably positive impact on the lives of others. But it was an unexpected voice. That provided the most clarity. Judge Patricia Williams, now retired but serving on our advisory board, joined the call from her home in North Carolina. Marcus, Rachel, may I remind you of something? The measure of your work isn't whether some journalist approves of your methods or motives. It's whether families like the Torres family, like the thousands of others you've helped, are better off because of what you've built. Over the following weeks, we made a decision that surprised even our closest advisors. Instead of mounting a defensive public relations campaign, we invited David Chang to spend a month embedded with our programs. Full access to our files, our methods, our finances, and most importantly, to the families we'd worked with. You want me to what? Chang asked during our initial phone call. We want you to get the whole story, I told him. Not just the public narrative, but the real work. Talk to families we've helped, families we couldn't help, families who didn't. Like our approach. Examine our financial records, our success rates, our failures. And if I find evidence that supports my initial concerns? Then you publish that, Rachel said simply. But you publish it with full context. You don't get to cherry-pick data to support a predetermined conclusion. Chang's month with our programs was intensive and often uncomfortable. He sat in on therapy sessions, with families' permission, reviewed legal case files, attended training, workshops, and most challengingly for us, conducted extensive interviews with our family members. Your parents say they sometimes feel like they're living in your shadow, he told us during one particularly difficult interview, that their own healing process has been overshadowed by your public success. They're probably right, Rachel admitted. Success can be its own kind of burden, especially when it comes from surviving trauma that you inflicted on someone else. Do you worry that you've made your family's private pain into a career? I answered honestly. Every day. But I also know that the alternative, staying silent, letting the shame fester, not using what we learned to help others, would have meant that all that pain served no purpose beyond our own suffering. Chang's final article series, published 6 weeks later, was nuanced in ways that surprised everyone. He documented genuine concerns about the commercialization of family trauma and the need for more rigorous outcome tracking in our programs. But he also chronicled the measurable impact of our work. Families reunited, money recovered, policies changed, lives saved. Most significantly, he wrote about spending time with families whose lives had been changed by our programs. The article that received the most attention was his profile of the Henderson family from Colorado Springs. Major Tom Henderson's brother had stolen $200,000 from their parents' estate while Tom was deployed in Iraq. Following our program's protocols, Tom had spent 18 months building a legal case while maintaining strategic silence about his brother's theft. When Tom finally confronted the situation, it led not just to financial recovery, but to his brother getting treatment for a gambling addiction that had been destroying his life. I could have destroyed my brother the day I found out, Tom told Chang. Instead, I chose to build a case that would help him while protecting our family. 2 years later, he's in recovery. He's repaid most of the money, and he's become an advocate for gambling addiction treatment in the military community. The Vasquez method isn't about revenge or reconciliation. It's about strategic action that opens the door to both justice and healing. Chang's conclusion surprised both supporters and critics of our work. The Vasquez siblings have indeed profited from their family's pain, but they've used those profits to systematically address the conditions that create such pain in the first place. Whether you approve of their methods or not, the data shows that military families are safer from financial exploitation because of their work. The articles led to broader conversations about family trauma, public healing, and the ethics of turning personal pain into systemic change. But for Rachel and me, the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source: our parents. "Mijo, Rachel," Mom said during our next family video call, "we read those articles, all of them, and we want you to know, we're proud of you, not just for what you've accomplished, but for how you've accomplished it." Dad, who still chose his words carefully, added, "You took the worst thing that happened to our family and used it to help other families. That's what good people do with their pain." The controversy, rather than derailing our work, led to increased congressional support for military family financial protection programs. A bipartisan group of legislators introduced the Military Family Financial Security Act, which codified many of our program's approaches into federal law. But perhaps the most personally meaningful development came when the Department of Defense announced the creation of the Vasquez Institute for Family Financial Resilience, a permanent research and training center dedicated to preventing and responding to family financial exploitation in military communities. The announcement was made at a Pentagon ceremony that our entire family attended: Mom, Dad, Rachel, David, and their twin daughters, Sophia and Elena, named for our grandmother. As we stood together while the Secretary of Defense spoke about the Institute's mission, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 5 years after Rachel stole my inheritance, we were standing in the Pentagon as the military's newest institute was named after our family. But more importantly, we were standing together as a family that had been broken and rebuilt stronger than before. The ceremony concluded with remarks from General Morrison. "The Vasquez family has demonstrated that the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge, it's the systematic prevention of future betrayals. Their work has protected thousands of military families and changed how America thinks about family financial security." That evening, our family gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Potomac. As we sat around the table, 3 generations brought together by shared purpose rather than just shared blood, Rachel raised her glass. "To Grandma Elena," she said, "who taught us that family isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest, about our imperfections and working to be better than we were yesterday." "And to the inheritance that actually mattered," I added. "Not the money, but the values. The understanding that love means holding each other accountable. That trust can be rebuilt if both people are willing to do the work." Sophia, now 4 years old, looked around the table with the serious expression she'd inherited from her mother. "Daddy says you and Uncle Marcus used to be in a big fight." Rachel and I looked at each other and laughed, the first time in years that we could find humor in our history. "We were, sweetheart," Rachel said. "Uncle Marcus and I had to learn that sometimes fighting isn't about winning, it's about figuring out how to love each other better." That night, I walked along the National Mall, past the memorials to those who'd served and sacrificed for their country. My phone buzzed with messages from military families around the world. Thank you notes, success stories, requests for help, reminders that our work touched lives in ways we might never fully know. But the message that mattered most was from Rachel. "Marcus, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for choosing justice over revenge. Thank you for giving me the chance to become someone worthy of Grandma Elena's love. And thank you for showing me that the most powerful inheritance isn't money. It's the choice to become the person your pain teaches you to be." As I reached the Lincoln Memorial, I thought about something Judge Williams had said during the IID ceremony earlier that day. True healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means remembering it in a way that serves the future, rather than imprisoning you in the past. Rachel and I had taken our family's inheritance, the money that was stolen and recovered, the trust that was broken and rebuilt, the love that was tested and strengthened, and transformed it into something that would outlast all of us. The Vasquez Institute would continue helping military families long after we were gone. The policies we'd helped create would protect generations of service members. The model we developed for family financial recovery would spread beyond the military to civilian communities. But the most important inheritance we'd created was simpler and more profound. Proof that families can survive even profound betrayal if they're willing to choose growth over grievance, accountability over abandonment, and shared purpose over shared bitterness. 10 years after Rachel forged my signature and stole $780,000 from our grandmother's estate, I stood in the Vasquez Institute's main training room, watching military families from around the world learn to protect themselves from financial exploitation by people they love. On the wall hung a framed photo of our grandmother Elena, with her favorite quote beneath it: "La familia se construye con las decisiones, no con la sangre." Family is built by choices, not by blood. Next to it hung a newer edition, the Congressional Medal of Family Service that Rachel and I had received jointly, not for our individual achievements, but for demonstrating that families could transform their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. Rachel appeared in the doorway, returning from a training session with newly deployed service members. She looked at the photos on the wall, then at me, and smiled. "You know what I realized today?" she said. "What's that?" "When I stole your inheritance, I thought I was taking your future. It turned out I was giving us both a different future than either of us could have imagined. A better one. Grandma Elena always said the best things in life come from the hardest choices. She was right about that, too." Rachel paused, looking around the room where dozens of military families were learning to protect themselves from the kind of betrayal we'd experienced. "Marcus, do you think she knows? What we built from what I broke?" "I think she knew before we did. I think that's why she split the inheritance equally, why she made us promise to take care of each other. She knew that someday we'd need to learn the difference between taking care of each other and taking care of each other's problems." That evening, I received a call from a Naval Academy cadet named Michael Chen. His grandmother had left him and his brother a significant inheritance, and he was concerned about protecting it while preparing for deployment after graduation. "Sir," he said, "I've read about your work, your family's story. I want to make sure my family doesn't go through what yours did. What should I do?" As I began walking him through our family financial protection protocols, I realized that this young man represented something powerful, a generation of military service members who would never have to learn about family financial betrayal the hard way because others had learned it for them. "Michael," I said, "the most important thing to remember is that trust isn't naive and protecting yourself isn't cynical. You can love your family completely while still safeguarding against the possibility that someone you love might make terrible choices." After the call ended, I updated the Institute's database with another potential success story, another military family that might stay together because of lessons learned from our family falling apart. The sunset outside my office window painted the Potomac River in shades of gold and pink. In a few minutes, I'd join Rachel and the rest of our family for our weekly dinner, now an in-person gathering since she'd moved to D.C. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sir, this is Staff Sergeant Williams from Fort Campbell. Your program helped me recover $50,000 my stepfather stole while I was in Afghanistan. But more importantly, it helped me understand that I could still love my mom without enabling her bad choices. My kids have a grandmother now instead of an enabler, and my stepfather got the addiction treatment he needed. Thank you for turning your family's worst moment into other families' saving grace." I read the message twice, then forwarded it to Rachel with a simple note. "Grandma Elena's inheritance keeps growing. Her response came immediately. "The best investments always multiply. See you at dinner, little brother."